Hey everybody, great to have you back here in the fish tank. Now today we're going to go through a Minion Masters Meta review, which is something we haven't done for a while, so it's definitely time to get back on that. Now if you're not familiar with this, basically we use the in-game leaderboards as our data set. So I have a system set up that scrapes those every hour, and then we just put that into a great big spreadsheet, and then we just figure out what we can glean from that information. Now, reminder that it's only the leaderboard, so stuff that's going on outside of the leaderboard, unfortunately, we don't have access to. But without any further ado, and just a quick reminder, if you're liking this video, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Let's dive in. Right, so this is version 2.13, the current version. We're going to start off looking at the master popularity overall. So we've got a bar chart here, a bar for each of the masters. If it's the yellow part is solos, the red part is randoms, the blue part is pre-mades, and we can see the overall master of choice just is Ratbo, followed by Stormbringer, in third place Morelia, and in fourth place Volko. So let's break that down a little bit so we can have a look at compare that to last season. So we've got two graphs here, the pie chart on the left, version 2.12 last season, and on the right our current season 2.13. So we can see here overall Ratbo, Stormbringer, Morelia, Volko are the top masters overall. But what's changed the most? Diona overall has seen quite a big increase, and I don't think that's necessarily because she's got stronger, but I think there's other things have got weaker. For example, Valorian did get nerfed in the latest patch. The Searing Light being the cooldown increased on that, and the Fervent Warrior only starting with the Holy Armor on cooldown. So with less people playing Valorian, then people have looked for a different alternative, and that seems to have been Diona. So big increases for Diona, Tronvir, as well as Volko, and big decreases for Morelia and Valorian, as we mentioned. So that's overall, but let's break it down more specifically into the different game modes. So this is for solos, 1v1. Again, last season on the left, this season on the right. So last season, Valorian was the #1 choice in solos on the leaderboard. We're not too shocked about that, and as I mentioned before, Valorian did get nerfed, so we can see a huge decrease. Valorian dropping down 14.5% from first to almost nothing. So that's that's what the nerfs have caused for that. Now, we mentioned earlier overall Diona had gone up. Diona's gone up mostly in solos, I think. So here we can see Volko is #1. Diona, the orange, is #2. And Diona's gone up hugely. If we look at the orange for last season, hardly any Diona. This season, lots of Diona. Volko, Diona, and Rekt, top 3 masters based on their play rate in the leaderboards. And one thing to mention is, a lot of people are not aware of this, but the masters have alternative master perks. So you can choose which perk to use within a game or before a game. And some of these are very strong. So, for example, when we're talking about balance in the game, and you know the game is balanced on a monthly basis by the community, the devs do give us some win rate data. Now, the win rate data they give us is not just for the leaderboard decks, it's for all, it's like diamond and above, I think. So it's not quite the same sort of data set as we have here, but Volko had the highest win rate at 56% overall, but when the alt perk 3 was being used, that win rate went up to 70%. So I think basically that alt perk 3, the Infinite Rage, I think it's called, is very, very strong. And then you might think, well, why is not everyone using it? Because I don't think everyone knows that alt perks exist. So Volko had the highest win rate, Diona at 55%, regardless of her perks, and Rekt had a 50% win rate when using the Gun Carter alt perk. So those were the top 3 based on their win rates from the data we looked at. Just a little sort of aside, because we're looking primarily here at what's played based on the leaderboard, but of course win rate is something that needs to be considered as well, but we don't have full access to that data. Right, next up, randoms. Masters in randoms. So we can see Morelia is still the master of choice, but it's gone down a lot. So, of course, what's gone down? Something has to have come up. So Morelia King Puff, Tronvir, and Mordar are the top the top four played Masters based on the leaderboard in randoms. Tronvir's had a big increase, Mordar as well, and Morelia and Rekt have dropped off, and of course Valorian as well. But we didn't see too much Valorian anyway, so only a small decrease there. And a reminder, average mana cost, you're kind of looking between sort of 3.5, 4.5, sort of overall average. You can get outside that depending on sort of if you want a cheap cycle deck or a heavy ritual deck, something like that. But that's the sort of the mana cost that you're looking for. Okay, so the top 3 Masters in randoms, Morelia, King Puff, and Tronvir. And then finally for this section, we're going to look at the pre-mades. Now, one thing to remember with pre-mades is sometimes people pre-made with lots of different people, and other times people pre-made with just one set teammate, with one set setup of decks. So sometimes it's important that the strength of the decks together rather than the strength of the decks on their own. Right, so the light orange is Stormbringer. So Stormbringer's still the pre-made master of choice, followed by Ratbow. So those two, almost 50%. And then the third place is Tronvir. So I think they definitely need some kind of balance in. Ratbow did get a nerf in the last patch, but it didn't seem to affect anything with that squeak attack. So Tronvir's gone up quite a lot, and Diona, whereas Morelia and Stormbringer still number 1, but has dropped off a little bit. If we look at the win rates, Ratbow has the highest win rate, 65%, which is way too high, and that's when using his ult perk attack. And then Stormbringer, 58% win rate. So if you're playing Ratbow and Stormbringer together, that's probably the highest win rate combination of Masters. And then Tronvir also at 58%. Right. So those are the Master popularity within the constructed modes, if you like. The ranked modes, and then we'll just have a look in draft mode. Draft is a little different, of course, because you can't choose exactly what you want. If you're not familiar with draft, it's where you build a deck from the different choices you're given. You choose a master from 3 masters, then you choose each card from 3 cards. Right, so Tronvir, still the most chosen master in draft, based on the draft leaderboard. Apep is 2nd now, Diona 3rd, and Morelia 4th. Now, Apep has gone up quite a lot, as has Tronvir. We've seen Valorian drop off a lot, and Setsu dropping off a lot. Now, one thing to mention, we will go through a lot of data, so if you need to slow the video down, you need to pause it, you need to screenshot it, you do whatever you need to do to get the most out of it. Right, rarity composition. We always cover this, but it doesn't really change much, but it's always important, I think, to highlight this to newer players. This game is not pay to win. You don't want a deck full of legendaries. You can see here, we've got the makeup of the decks. We've got common, rare, supreme, and legendary cards. And as you can see, overall, most of the cards played are either common or rare, with some supremes and legendary in there. So don't think you need to get a full deck of legendaries. That's not really going to get you too far. And the most basic cards are really, really strong and versatile. But not really much has changed since last season on that. Factions. We've got 9 factions in the game. We'll just go over this very quickly. So Voidborn's still the faction of choice. Slither has gone up a lot, and that's primarily because of Unkahesh. We'll cover that when we get to the cards, but Unkahesh, the spider, if you like, the spider but not really a spider, is kind of everywhere. So Slither's gone up quite a bit. Accursed has gone down quite a bit. And if you want to break down the faction composition into the different modes, solos, randoms, and pre-mades, then that data is here for you. Right, wildcard usage. So back in the day, you could wildcard in any mode, but now you can only wildcard in randoms. But we have our historic graphs to remind ourselves: no solo wildcards, no pre-made wildcards. But if we look in randoms, we can see 58% of decks using no wildcards, about 20% using 1 wildcard, and 21% using 2 wildcards. Remember, wildcards are duplicates, where you can use up to 3 copies of a single card or 2 copies of 2 cards. Okay, so those are sort of the amount of wildcards being used, but what are the wildcards that are being used? Okay, so Skeleton Crew here. And before I go into it, actually, let me just clarify exactly how these slides work. So we've got a bit of a color code. So for each card, they have a color around the outside that indicates if it's green, they've gone up since last season on the rank. Red, it's gone down. White, it's a new card, which we generally don't see anymore. And black, it's the same rank as last time. So for example, Skeleton Crew, we look at that. We've got 2 numbers on the card. The top left card is its current rank. The top right number is its previous rank. So for example, Skeleton Crew, it's currently rank 1. It was previously rank 1. It hasn't changed its rank, so it's black. Whereas at Ankahesh, current rank 2, previous rank 115th. And of course it's gone up, so it's green. So we can see that a lot of people wildcarding Ankahesh, whereas previously not only was Ankahesh not being wildcarded, it was just generally not being played at all. Right, so this just shows us what is kind of being wildcarded. As you can see, it's not always about wildcarding big, strong, powerful units. Cheap units like the Skeleton Crew, great bridge grab, even when walking backwards, gives them a lot of strength. So Ankahesh has gone up the most. Swarmers, we've seen an increase in that being played. Goric Sacrifice as well. Skeleton Crew still number 1, but also dropped off the most, which is kind of interesting because I don't think they got nerfed. Tantrum Throwers dropping off. They did get a nerf. I can't remember when, but you get 3 of them now instead of 2, but they're 3 mana instead of 2. But I still like them because you can split them now. Right, so those are the wild cards. Right, top cards overall. So when we talk about overall, we're talking about solos, randoms, and pre-mades, all ranked game modes. So the top card overall, based on our leaderboard data, is of course Ankahesh. 269th last time. There's only 290 cards or something like that. I'm not sure. I can't remember how many, but basically it was probably unplayed last season, and now it's the number 1 card this season. But you might be asking, why is that? Well, of course, it got a buff. It got Thick Hide. Now, Thick Hide basically means that it is very good at tanking, especially against little units. Thick Hide reduces incoming damage. So if you've got lots of little damage from a Scrat Horde or something, the Thick Hide reduces each of those little damages. So it's really effective. Not so effective against big targets, but very effective against little targets. So that changed. That change basically brought Ankahesh from nothing to everything, and expect it to get nerfed in the next patch. Okay, what else did we see? We saw a big increase to Smite as well. Remember, that did get changed, where it was given an activation with Empyrean Army that costs a little bit more, but the base version cost less, only 4 mana, and expect that to get a nerf because it's definitely too powerful at the moment. But Smite there we can see in 11th place, gone up from 187th last season. So some huge changes, some stuff not really changing much, some stuff changing massively. Now Wogasaur Puff dropped off, and that's probably because I think it got a nerf. Bevalanche dropped off, and I just think a lot of people are playing Smite instead of that. Hypnotize dropped off because it got nerfed, it lost the Slitherbind. And again, just to go back to the different rarities of the cards, these top 27 cards, only 3 of them are legendary. Ankahesh, the Veilstalker, and Morgul, I think, are the legendaries in there. 18 of them are common. So out of the top 27 cards, 18 are common. So super not pay to win. And based on the leaderboard, overall, every single card was used at least once, which I think is quite incredible. Right, let's break things down a little bit. So we're going to look at non-spells, and we're going to look at them over the different game modes. So non-spells, we're talking about minions or buildings. So those are the kind of the 3 things. We've got minions and buildings as non-spells, and then spells as the 3rd thing. So top card in solo, Drone Walker. That's likely to get a nerf in the next patch. Since it was given that nat, it definitely seems a little bit too strong. So Drone Walker, number 1, and still number 1 from last season. Ankahesh there, number 2, and previously basically unplayed. Slitherbound there, getting a little bit more play as well. And we can see Ankahesh is the top played card in both of the 2v2 pre-mades modes. Again, previously unplayed, now massively played. We also see in solos Spire Stag. It's gone up massively. That did get a buff. We'll probably get a nerf. It's probably a little bit too strong at the moment. Went up from being kind of unplayed to very heavily played. So Ankahesh seeing increased play rate in all game modes, as you would expect. And as we saw before, overall, Ankahesh is the most played card. 1.5 times more than the second place card, which is Swarmers. Okay, so next up, let's have a look at the spells. So these are the top spells in the different game modes. So we can see in solos, top 3 spells, Chain Lightning, it is still number 1 and was previously number 1. Daggerfall and Impetus Blast. Impetus Blast is a really fun spell, not really a damaging spell, but more of a utility spell, which the top players can of course get a lot out of. And then if we look into random, Smite, now the number 1 chosen spell, Blade Star and Chain Lightning. And then in premates, Smite, Chain Lightning and Arcane Bolt. Remember, Arcane Bolt got a little change a while ago, so if it doesn't destroy its target, it only costs you 3 mana. If it does destroy its target, it costs you 5 in the form of a couple of extra mana freeze. Excuse me. Right. So, if you're looking for spells in your deck, these are definitely a good place to go. Some good choices here. So overall, we've seen Chain Lightning, second to Smite, third to Daggerfall. Okay, so we spoke earlier about how the Legendaries are not critically... they are important, but you don't need a deck full of Legendaries. But if you are going to be playing them, which are you going to put in your deck? And of course, the Legendary of choice currently is Ankahesh, Desert's Doom, aka the spider that's not really a spider. And if we look at the overall data, the play rate of Ankahesh in first compared to the Veilstalker as the second most played Legendary, which will blow Jackier's mind. That the Veilstalker is second. The Ankahesh Desert's Doom is played 3 times as much as the Veilstalker. So massively, massively played Ankahesh, and expect that to change in some way for the next season. So top played Legendaries in solos, we've got Ankahesh, Morgrul and Protocol Assassin. Randoms, we've got Ankahesh, the Veilstalker and Reconator. And premades, Ankahesh, the Veilstalker and Razor Squadron. So if you're looking for a Legendary, if you're desperate to spend your currency on Legendaries, this is definitely a good way to go. Remember, some Legendaries are very sort of deck specific. You want to build around them, whereas other Legendaries are very, very flexible. You can put them in any deck. Right, so let's have a look now at the draft side of things. So these are the top non-spell cards for draft. And remember, draft is a little different because you can't just choose what you want. You have to choose based on the options you're given. But if we have a big enough data set, which we do, we should be able to get something a little bit interesting from them. So, of course, Ankahesh 13th overall in draft. Even though people are not getting it too often, when they do, they take it. So Chain Gang is the top played card in draft. Defenso Chopper, Wolf Among Sheep, Assassin. So this is a really good sort of slide to keep to hand, because if you're drafting and you just want to, if you're not familiar with the cards and you want to see what's strong, you can just pull up this slide. If you're given any of these options, they're going to be good options. Remember, you can't just definitely choose these, because you need to make sure that your deck is balanced in terms of the different kind of minions dealing with the different kind of threats, removal spells, etc. But this is definitely a great place to start. And a good place to support that with will be the top spells in draft. So interestingly, we see Last Stand. That's previously was played pretty well as well, which is not something we'd generally see in just open ranked modes. So draft, Monitor Nat, Morgrul's Mark, Future Past, Fireball. So some nice spells there. And if you're looking to build your draft deck, these would be great ones to include. Right, so we've looked at the Masters, we looked at the cards. Now let's put them together and look at the top decks. Now, when we're talking about top decks, we are talking about, firstly, where that deck is on the leaderboard, and secondly, the cards that are in it, what is their rank. Okay, so we're doing some calculations and putting that all together. So the top decks are going to be the decks that are found towards the top of the leaderboard and have the lowest, or depending, lowest, because that's how we've been doing it, the lowest ranked cards. So lowest sounds bad, but in this case is good. You know, first is number 1 card is the best card, which is the lowest card. Okay, that makes sense? Right, so the top deck based on that criteria so far, and what we'll do here is we'll have a look at the top deck for each of the Masters. So overall, Volko, very heavy rage-based deck, and of course this is going to be taking account of taking use of the alternate Master Perk 3, and of course has the Spider within there. Now the second deck we have Diona, which is a pretty cheap cycle deck, but of course it has the Spider in there. And from what I've played so far, so many people are playing the Spider that the Spider is really the best counter to the Spider from what I've seen. So you kind of have to play it. Unless you're this Ratbo deck, where I think is a JF deck, where you can see this is just a very cheap cycle deck. With the Crystal Construct as the tanky boy. Now, interestingly, one thing I tried this deck, and one thing I noticed, it has a lot of air, and normally you don't see so many air cards in a deck because, of course, air can't take bridge. But when we're using Ratbo and we're generating the scrats, then even though you're using the air, you're still getting the bridge control with it. So that's kind of a nice bit of deck building there. Right, Valorian and Setsu. Of course, once we get to Setsu, we see a lot more spells. Next up, we see a Milloween deck. This could well be a Death Shoot Disu deck. Fairly cheap spells. Flightless Dragons, of course, for the strong DPS. Next up, we have Apep, again with the Spider in it. Just sort of cheap, fairly cheap cycle. Magma Cannon to keep power on the bridges. And, of course, the Spider at the end there. Similar King Puff deck. And then we see Morelia. A Tronvir deck. Then we have a Ravager deck, Wrecked, Stormbringer, which is kind of a cheap cycle deck with Revenant, which I don't know. The thing with Revenant is it does kill stuff, but then once it's killed its thing, it normally just goes over and doesn't really achieve too much. I think it's more powerful in duos where it's got a lot more targets that it can hit, because once you get it on face, then you can kill it pretty quickly. And that's kind of how you deal with the Spider as well. And then we have a Mordar deck here. Interesting Mordar deck. A couple of things we need to pay attention to here. So remember, Ankahesh will be generating those little spiderlings when it's killing things, so you need to be careful that you don't revive those, because that could be a big waste of your tombstone. And of course, Dragon Ball, you don't ideally want to be reviving the Dragon Whelp from the Dragon Ball, as everything else is pretty more valuable. Right, so that's the solo decks. Let's have a look now at the random decks. So Tronvir came out top, and you can see these top 2 decks are basically the same. They just had a different master, so Tronvir or Apep. King Puff in 3rd place, which is, I think that's my deck. Yeah, looks like it. Changed it up a little bit this season. Smite and Ankahesh were very strong, so we put those in instead of Shield Guard and Beavalanche, I think. Then we have a fairly sort of bridge control-y Volko with some powerful top-end cards. Ratbo, which is just going to be kind of a sort of a spammy Ratbo, as you would expect. Then we have Morelia. No spell reduction options there, really, in the Morelia deck, so probably just using the standard perks. Mordar up there, which is just sort of a Healy Spirity deck. Very difficult to deal with. You have to be very careful not to play into that deck. But if you don't, then you can kind of do okay with it. Right, Milloween there. See some more spells. Diona, we've seen more of her this season. This is a kind of a Stormbringer deck built all around the Empowered Soul Stealer, which of course has Vampiric now, so it heals when it kills something. So the idea is to keep this alive. You've got the Glen's Brew, which you can use to heal it, and then you've got the Arcane Barrage to support it. And then the final random decks here, we've got Setsu, we've got a Wreck deck, Valorian, and Ravager. And then finally for the deck section, we're going to look at the pre-made decks. And as I mentioned before, some pre-made decks are built to work specifically with something else, whereas other things are built to be kind of flexible. So, for example, you might see a pre-made deck that has a Guardian in it, but doesn't have any Crystal Elves. That's because it's going to run with a Crystal Elf deck, and you want your teammate to play the Guardian because it allows the Crystal Elf deck to stay within Mana Surge. Okay, so the top deck here is a Ratbo deck We can see there we're using Smite, very powerful this season, and of course the Spider. Next up we have Stormbringer, lots of ranged units as you would expect. Razor Squadron to consume the tech, get some value that way. King Puff in third place here overall. Tronvir and Milloween. As you can see, all of them using Smite. Not quite so much Anka-Hesh as we've seen in randoms. Right. Now we have APEP, pretty standard APEP deck. Sanctum of the Cleansing Fire, interesting to see that from Valorian. That did get a buff in the last patch where it has more health. Doesn't last for longer, but it's more difficult to spell it down, for example. Valorian. And now we have a Mordor deck, which is a Ritual of Servitude deck. So again, you've got to be careful not getting the bad revives in this. And we're talking about the little spiders from Anka-Hesh. And I think the Reconator drops a little Scrat as well. So a couple of things to be wary about when playing your Tombstone. It's a pretty standard Diona deck. Then we have a Morelia deck. This is kind of an interesting Morelia deck because this is an Accursed deck, but there's a lot of non-Accursed cards in it. So that means that your Accursed Ascension is going to be very late. And the value that you're going to get from that is going to be reduced. Of course, you can play around your non-Accursed cards. You want to only use them if necessary. But it's up there, so it must be doing okay. Now we have a Wreck deck, Setsu, Accursed Setsu, and just the aggro Ravager. Right, so those are the top decks for those three modes. So if you're looking for a deck for a specific master, these are going to be a good place to start. Of course, you can adjust them as you wish. Now, the next section we're going to go through very quickly. So if you want to see this in detail, play the video slower, pause it, screenshot it, whatever you need to do, because we don't want this to be an hour long. I don't know how long we are, but hopefully it won't take too long. Right, so here we go. These are the top cards overall for solos, non-spells, spells for solos, and legendaries for solos. And then we'll do the same for randoms. So top cards non-spells, top spells, top legendaries, and again the same for premates. Top cards overall in premates, top cards non-spells, top spells, top legendaries. And now we're going to break down the top cards per master. So if you're looking at building a deck for a master and you want to know which cards go well with which masters, this is exactly what you need. Right, so top cards for APEP, solos, randoms, premates. Now top cards for Diona, solos, randoms, premates. Top cards next for King Puff, solos, randoms, premates. Now top cards for Milloween, solos, randoms, premates. Now top cards for Mordor, again in solos, randoms, premates. Now top cards for Morelia, again in solos, randoms, premates. Top cards for Wrecked, in solos, randoms, and premates. Top cards for Ratbo, again in solos, randoms, and premates. Top cards for Ravager in solos, randoms, premates. Top cards for Setsu in solos, in randoms, in premates. Now top cards for Stormbringer, again in solos, in randoms, in premates. Now for Tronvir, solos, randoms, premates. Valorian in solos, in randoms, in premates. And finally Volko in solos, in randoms, and premates. Bam! Guys, great work. We got through it. Okay, so we went through a lot of data there. Hopefully you followed along with the main points. Of course, if you got any questions or anything you want to mention, make sure you drop them in the comments. And if you want to go back and look through it, pause it, screenshot it, whatever you need to do, I will allow it. But thanks for coming along, and always good to have a conversation about this. And of course, we're looking at what the data is giving us based on the leaderboard. So if you're outside of the leaderboard, then let us know if your experience mirrors what we're seeing here, or if things are a bit different down there. As always, if you enjoyed the content, make sure to like, comment and subscribe. My name's Bad as a Fish, and I'll see you again soon here in the fish tank.